The W League. Now, you can launch a competition with all sorts of advertising campaigns and marketing and strategy statements, but there's no substitute for what happens on the pitch. So the season opener was 22 seconds old when Katrina Gorry scored for the Roar. But the momentum in women's football in this country sits on the shoulders of one person, and that's Sam Kerr. She's the captain of the Perth Glory, and she took just 3 minutes to score against the defending title holders, the Melbourne City, and led her team to a 4-1 win. And in that moment is contained the possibilities of the next few months.
Well, I think, Jared, the FFA has been caught napping in regards to women's sport over the last few years. The AFL and cricket have really shown them up, and finally it's good to see that they struck a new pay deal. I mean, the minimum's still $10,000. It's not a lot of money, but to put a bit of effort and time into the promotion. And how good are the players? I mean, the fact that they're able to back it up amid all the hype. Sam Kerr, they have lacked a poster girl for women's soccer in this country for a long time. I mean, you think of Elise Perry, Meg Lanning for the Southern Stars, you know, you think of Geitz and Shani Layton for netball. But when you thought of the Matildas a few years ago, there wasn't a real face or name. This is it, Sam Kerr. And for her to score in the 3rd, 4th minute for Perth Glory, the fact she's back here playing, she's played 9 of the 10 seasons, it's a great launching pad for their 10th season to sort of elevate themselves to the next level and try and compete with the AFLW and also what the cricketers are doing.
What a player for the moment. Like, she did it with the Matildas, she's done it there. It's the first sport that's ever had their official launch actually during a game. Her scoring the goal is like, OK, season started.
Yeah, that's
now.
Exactly. And they've had to do it with nothing, really, haven't they? I mean, the Matildas have done it with nothing, so they've done all their talking on the pitch.
And perfectly timed, given the Matildas play China in 2 games, Melbourne and Geelong. Very strategic, I think, given the AFLW attempts to steal football's youth. So I think that's well timed.
And on the A-League, we referenced Melbourne City last week. They continue on an unbeaten start to the season, 4 in a row. And again, Ross McCormack, who's their international on loan at the moment, scored both of their goals against Adelaide.
They've done really well with McCormack. Losing Fornaroli could have been a season killer, and he's come in and his set piece yesterday was, you know, outstanding. But counterintuitively for City, who've leaked like sieves during most of their history, they've got a defence. They've got Schenkfeld, Muscat, LaRocca, Jamison back there. It's an actual solid back four for Melbourne City. You can watch them and not assume that they're going to cough up the 2 goals that they do in the last 10 minutes every week.
Yes,
I'm finding it very unnerving, Jared.
Are you ready to be supporting the top team?
I sort of am. And look, strategically for the club, the one thing that they can offer is winning. That's the only... They don't have a geographic advantage. They were 5 years too late in with Victory. Victory had all that success, got all the supporters from all the, you know, original NSL clubs. They have to be excellent and win. So it's going to be really interesting to see on Friday night. They host Sydney City 1v2 at their home ground. It'll be interesting to see if they get more than the usual 8,000 or 9,000, whether they can pump it up to 14 or 15.
And the League World Cup, how it was sustained as a competition, how it was sustained as a concept. It was not a sellout on Friday night in Melbourne as it began, but the TV ratings were thunderous, indicating that there's certainly a place and a thirst for it. And you contemplated this in the Offsiders column, Richard, as to what this is and where it sits and how it will endure.
Yeah, it was interesting. The crowd was disappointing. I mean, 22,000 in a 28,000 seat stadium. I think it was a victim of its own poor promotion, but also I think the media. I think Melbourne prides itself as the sports capital, yet on the back page of some papers the day before you had Slater, Cronk and Smith playing a home test in Australia. The main story was about a 3rd-string Hawthorn player being delisted that was 24 hours old. I think that's poor by the papers in a town that prides itself on.
Does that come back to the Kangaroos? Did they do enough? I mean, they should have been throwing everything at this in the week leading up. And there was no promotion whatsoever. I agree.
Promotion's part of it, but I think sometimes editors outsmart themselves and they allow the AFL to play them on a break with their, you know, exhaustive domination of the media cycle.
And the Kangaroos missed a golden opportunity. You've got a former track work jockey in Billy Slater in the team, and you've got Winks racing the day after. Where was the media opportunity at Moonee Valley? with Hugh Bowman.
And the last time that the big three will probably play in Melbourne. So it was an interesting decision to open the World Cup in Melbourne.
Well, that was a financial decision.
Yeah.
The decision was that the
Sydney
Melbourne government paid $1.5 million.
Yeah, they bid for it.
Yeah, New South Wales government started off promising $4 million and ended up with zero. And yet the same people who were complaining about not having games in New South Wales, of course, damned the decision. So typical cycle of self-defeating.
And so over the next
New South
5
Wales
weeks, as the
Rugby
World
League.
Cup plays out, we've got just 2 games, I think both featuring Lebanon,
Lebanon,
in Sydney because
Australia.
they didn't bid for it.
Lebanon, Australia and Lebanon, England. Yeah, absolutely. They didn't bid for it. And then when it doesn't happen, they complain about it.
I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. Sydney, we've talked all year about how poor the crowds are in Sydney, and then it doesn't get any World Cup games. Well, you can't complain about it when you don't support the sport. And the aim of this exercise is to grow the sport, not only internationally, but nationally as well and across the Pacific Rim.
And the Pacific side of things is one of the most important parts to any World Cup that stretches over a period of time is the emotional investment by the teams who aren't going to be there at the pointy end. And we did get a taste of that yesterday. There was the Samoa haka. This is the Fiji Song of Prayer, and then the scenes surrounding the PNG team were electrifying.
Yeah, I think this is what this World Cup in the earliest stages, even right up to the semi-finals, has to be. It has to be about the joy of the well, we call them minnows. They're some really good players playing, very good top-rate NRL players representing in these teams. There was just an absolute joy in the celebrations before these games. So I think that's what it's all about. Josh, you were recently in New Guinea, and I think even the World Cup organisers themselves were startled about a couple of years ago when New Guinea paid $5 million to get 3 games. But you can see what it means to the people over there, can't you?
I think you'll find an oil mining company might have been involved in that as well. There's some serious money in that part of the world, and they fund the stadium as well. I was in Fiji as well. The game in PNG is already at saturation point, but in Fiji it is starting to rival rugby union. You see a lot of NRL jerseys there. I know we're not talking about global powerhouse countries here, but on a rugby league scale, it's good to see them making progress, and I think the eligibility rules are going to be debated till the cows come home, whether players can chop and change. But I think for a tournament like this, you need the talent spread.
Well, for the game itself, it's interesting that a guy like Suli Vunivalu chose rugby league ahead of rugby union, even though he'd gone to a top rugby union school in Auckland. Mm-hmm. So if they can then, on top of that, showcase him playing for the national side, the next Sulis might choose league over union. So it's a powerful thing for the game.
And he chose Fiji over New Zealand. He could have represented New Zealand in league, got paid $50,000 for his troubles in this tournament, but he's representing Fiji and singing very nicely as well.
Josh, will the tournament sustain interest over the next 5 weeks? Because, I'm interested to know, when do the Kangaroos play their next competitive game?
Yeah, probably won't be to the semi-final, to be fair, Kel, because they really needed a hard hit out on Friday night.
And they got it, didn't they?
They did.
It didn't reflect the scoreboard.
Yeah, and look, I think 14 teams is probably 4 too many. I think 10 would be an ideal number. So if there are some blowouts in the next couple of weeks, it could damage the tournament. We need an upset. We need a giant kill, and it could come when Tonga plays New Zealand in what's going to be a real bitterly contested
I disagree
clash.
with you about the capping the number of teams. It's for the same reason I think this in the cricket's World Cup, where the more you bring it in, the less opportunities you have for people to embrace it and whatever. So what if there's blowouts? I mean, the things that happen around the games kind of tend to make them, the joy in the stadiums that you have in New Guinea. So I disagree. I think 14 is a good number.
And they're getting the opportunity to play against the best in the world, which to those players would mean everything, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So Australia won. Opening ceremonies can tend towards the naff a bit, but there was a moment in this. A man who never fluffs his lines on the main stage, Jonathan Thurston, he fluffed his line.
We will be selfless. And with the chevron on our chests, we will be selfless in victory.
You had to know what you were listening for, but once you know it's there.
That's a fine rugby league tradition, Jared. Players dropping the F-bomb on national TV, happening grand final, so why not a World Cup opener? It's amazing. Jonathan Thurston, as you said, he's achieved it all with such composure. I reckon he would have been more nervous before that than any stage he's ever performed on. He wrote those words himself. He was the driving force behind that. performance, so your heart does go out to him.
There was a bit of self-consciousness to the whole thing because they're trying to create an Australian haka, and it was a bit discordant, but good on them. I wrote this recently about the Wallabies when they wore the jersey. Sports are very good at signalling causes, but what do they do next? The one thing with the rugby league people is that they're using this to do good things elsewhere. I know there's like a Indigenous NRL Australian jersey that Mal Meninga's using in remote communities. And basically, kids can't get it unless they do the health checks, the necessary sort of things. It's through the Arthur Beetson Foundation. So they're using it in a practical way. So good on them for embracing the cause.
And just as league was grabbing centre stage, the New South Wales Police confirmed that they'd completed their investigation into match fixing, which centred mainly around Manly. There were no charges to come from it, but there were, I think, the rather familiar grim faces and a message that we've heard more than once.
They develop relationships with individuals outside of the rugby league. Now, some of those people are just preying on players. A lot of players are young. They need good mentors. They need people to help them guide their way through cocaine use, for example, for gambling. I mean, there are players we've seen throughout this investigation, we've seen players who actually have debts greater than the value of their contracts. Now, that's scary for them.
Despite hundreds of hours of investigations and interviews and surveillance, there's been no charges laid, and that should give fans, players, followers of our sport great confidence as we head into next season.
So how did you interpret?
Well, I thought that could have been Jason Clare speaking 4 years ago before the AUSSIDERS press conference. Exactly the same lines, exactly the same theme about players being groomed to match fix through drugs and prostitutes and whatnot. I found it grandstanding from the police. How many millions of dollars would have gone into this investigation? I've been no cheerleader for the NRL on this either. I think there probably were legitimate concerns, but hey, they didn't get the evidence. So don't face saving grandstand and smear an entire sport with unsubstantiated allegations, no names, nothing, no follow-up after the story dropped on Friday. I think it was extremely damaging. I think it was PR spin, and I was really disappointed in how the media just swallowed it all.
Josh, I mean, that's been the theory the whole way through, that they failed on the match fixing investigation. They found a little bit on salary caps here and there. Now they're throwing this out to basically face save, as you said. I mean, obviously no one in the rugby league world, particularly, people in the media and so forth, are surprised about links between, the game and prostitution and drugs and, gambling. But is there enough there from your experience to push on with this, or is this just a total smokescreen?
No, I think it was just a smokescreen completely, yes. But if you turned it around and devoted all those resources into any industry or any sport in Australia, you're telling me you're not going to find the same sort of stuff? Rugby league had the spotlight on it because of, I think there were some legitimate concerns. But to bring this out on the day of the World Cup game, and let's not forget, a year ago, they did the same thing on the day of State of Origin as well.
Israel Folau, we should note, during the week for the third time, the John Eales medalist. He's not going to go on the spring tour, so he's given up the chase for the international record for the year.
Cooper Cronk's gone to Sydney for love. He's gone to New Zealand for love. Given up potential $500,000 to play, I think, half a dozen or more club games in Japan. So, these guys do have hearts.
I think it signals a newfound maturity from sport. One thing I've noticed being with the Kangaroos, they had all their families on a trip to Fiji, and they've realised how much that can play into performance if their home life isn't right. I'm surprised stuff like this has been overlooked for so long.
Well, they've already done it with Pocock.
If you're Michael Checker, you'd rather him be sitting on a beach with Maria Tutaia than playing rugby in Japan, and there might be an injury.
Yep.
All right, an observation to finish, Josh.
Really like the comments from the AFL chairman today about weaning these clubs off poker machine revenue. If sports clubs and sports are to sustain for the next decade, they've got to stop relying on lazy revenue.
It's two young Indigenous female athletes that are quietly going about their business very successfully at the moment, both called Ash. Jared, Ash Gardner will probably make her test debut for the women's cricket team. She becomes the third Indigenous player in the history to play in a test. We've had over 600 players represent Australia at test level, so good luck to her over the next few weeks. Ashley Barty in tennis started the year ranked 271. She's inside the top 20. Congratulations. Super consistent year. She's overtaken Daria Gavrilova, and I think she'll be a better player than Gavrilova over the next summer, so well done to her.
Ben Simmons, his first triple-double in the NBA during the week. he will become the highest profile Australian athlete ever. Not necessarily the best, but the highest profile if he continues on this course.
We were disagreeing about this earlier. He has the potential to be the best athlete that Australia has ever produced.
This is my final observation. Highest profile.